Hello friends, and welcome to Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to talk about this incredible month we have coming up here in October. Starting with the eclipse of October 2nd, and that is going to be somewhat in the rearview mirror just by a few days by the time you see this. However, I'm actually recording it on Wednesday, so pretty much coincident with that new moon eclipse. And really, however, the topic, what I want to talk about is really all four of the major lunations, including the quarter moons, for this October time frame, because it's just, to me, really so fascinating. And you'll see how the new planetary bodies, new 21st century planets that I've been researching, really come into this the configurations of October. So let's take a look at the charts. So here we got the chart. You should be able to see it now. As far as the eclipse chart, you know, for almost the very beginning of the month, on the 2nd of the month, October 2nd, 10 degrees of Libra. And I showed a couple of extra things here because I want you to see how amazing this is. We have at the 10 degree mark, the eclipse degree, we have the sun and moon at 10 and 4 minutes. We have Makemake is also at 10 degrees, 17 minutes, a quarter of a degree different, and partile, which we call same degree, you know, it makes it significant. So we have, and it's an eclipse. So we have a very significant presence of Makemake in this new moon eclipse configuration. And that is one of the things that I want to bring forward as far as this particular configuration is concerned, because it gives us a chance, since it's so powerful, so strong in this particular configuration, gives us a chance to see what are these new planets all about. And you know, I have been describing them, talking about them. Well, not only do we have a partile conjunction between the eclipse degree, the sun and moon, and Makemake at 10 degrees of Libra, but we also have Mercury very close by at 11. And in fact, Venus at 11 degrees of Scorpio, one sign over. So we have a pretty strong Mercury in this eclipse. And I mean, what it means, I think it's a strong Mercury, a strong mental component, indicating, and in Libra, which is an air sign, indicating that it's a thoughtful time. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things we can say about these fractious times that we're living through, very intense. But what we can say in this particular month is that there is a process of thoughtful, analytical, logical thought that is not the only thing we have. You know, I think it's very important to recognize that we have, you might say, heart as well as mind. You might say we have the gestalt, or the understanding of the mystical. Everything is not rational. There is the non-rational. I believe that there's both rational and non-rational that we have, and maybe even multidimensional beyond 3 dimensions or a 4th dimension of time. We may have 5, 6, 7 dimensions, who knows? But because I don't think we do understand that very well yet. But anyway, in this particular instance, though, it is our thought process that can help us dig our way out of these conundrums that we find ourselves in as a society, perhaps individually. There's a lot of transformation in the air right now. You know, Pluto's very prominent. Pluto is also just transitioning this month. It will station to direct motion. Right now, you can see Pluto over here, 29 degrees and a half of Capricorn. So this is the dipping its toe back into Capricorn on the way to its final entrance into Aquarius, which happens late in November, or mid to late November, after the election. So we do have a strong position, and then you know, once it's in Aquarius, that's kind of, it's going to stay there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, I believe that there's a lot of transformation in our environment right now. We are forced by circumstances, which is the way we change, to take a good look at what's up with us individually, our individual patterns, some of them that we're very used to, part of ourselves, that can just stay, not everything changes. And part of what we do habitually, what we have as our basic patterning, may have to shift. And why? Because we understand more about what that is, what effects it may have. There's changes that we may feel like we need to make, both as individuals and, of course, the culture itself is changing. And we do have such a tremendous factor right now of violence in just the body politic, violence, as we can see in various hotspots in the world where there's active war going on. Of course, the two places mostly are the Middle East and also Ukraine. That war continues. Very, very disturbing to see people hurt like that, to see their lives upended, see children killed, see apartment buildings bombed. So this is a difficult time. And I do think a thoughtful person, a person with a heart, has to respond, has to feel the difficulty of it, and has to, try to make sense of it, try to figure out what they can do, what is our stand. So all of that comes up in this month's lunations, and I want to look at the other lunations of the month, the first quarter moon, the full moon, which is on the 17th, and then also the last quarter moon of the 24th, I think is very interesting as well. So what I want to tell you, though, before I go to those, what I want to tell you about this particular eclipse configuration, which you may have heard elsewhere, there's a lot of talk about it, is that we do have as well, one thing is we do have the presence of Lilith at 10 degrees. So this is 5 planets, counting Lilith as a planet. And I do count Makemake as a planet. I call them KBO planets. They're beyond Pluto even. They're in the Kuiper belt. They were officially designated as planets. They're called dwarf planets by the nomenclature of the astronomers, but we know that Pluto, being a dwarf planet, officially in its nomenclature does not change the fact that for us it's still one of the 3 outer planets. It's still very important in chart work. I believe these new ones are very important in chart work as well, and I've been trying to suss them out, try to understand them better. And I consider Makemake, which is right here at 10 degrees of Libra, and also Haumea in the first degree, now second degree of Scorpio, to be nature planets, connection to nature's creatures. You find with Haumea especially, they love pets, they love animals, they love natural settings, but they also love a sense of the natural way of being, right action, right relationship. It's a very simple formula. Treat people the way you yourself would like to be treated. It's so simple, so obvious, so clear. There's also a question of telling the truth as much as you can. That is to say, what you know to be what you feel to be the truth, and expressing that rather than actually lying, which gets you into trouble eventually. I think that's one of the big issues of our time, is how can we tell truth from lies, and how can we get a little bit more of a moral compass going in the culture and individual people not to, because I think it's very important. If you can say the truth as you know it, it may not be the other person's truth, but at least they can understand where you're coming from, and at least you're not trying to deceive them. So these are the factors, I think, that come in with these new ones, Makemake and Haumea. We also have Eris, which I have studied extensively, written that book about, and I think the understanding of Eris as a feminine warrior in support of soul intention, which is what I say in the book that I wrote, The 10th Planet, I think that's really catching on. People do understand that it's a fierce energy, powerful energy, can be chaotic if it's up against something that it doesn't like. You have to go to your deepest attitudes, your deepest understanding, what you really truly believe. And that's where you take your stand. That's what Eris is all about. And these come up in this in the lunations of this month, as I will try to show. Now, in addition to the fact that we do have Lilith involved in this, Lilith is a bit of a rebel. Lilith is sort of the cast out feminine. That's the myth, that Lilith was not acceptable in certain ways. Maybe she wanted to be on top. It goes back to the Adam and Eve. She was the first woman, and then Eve was created out of the rib of Adam and became his helpmate. And Lilith was kind of on her own, kind of a wild card, kind of a wild woman on her own. So if we associate that, you could associate it with sexuality, you could associate it with Tantra, with sexual healing. You could also associate Lilith with kind of the rebellious feminine that says, no, I won't. I will not do your patriarchal thing. I won't be in the kitchen. And that has been coming up lately because there are characterizations of women by some of the political parties. One of the two political parties, I guess you would say, there's a big battle about women's autonomy, being able to make their own choice as far as reproductive freedom is a big issue right now. So these things are kind of up, and this is the last 30 days of the American election, with the November 5th being the election day, coming up in about 30 days' time, just after the next new moon, which is on November 1st, is the next new moon around the same degree of the next sign of Scorpio. Anyway, so let's say this configuration does have quite a few very interesting factors just in the Libra quadrant. Within a degree and a half, we have how many? 5 planets? So that's really quite something. And we do want to call this an intensity, and where we'll be paying attention to what's going on, including the fact that Makemake is so powerful in here. And it might give us a little bit of a clue. I say Makemake is kind of an activist agenda for social activism, for earth issues as well, for protecting the environment. There is the issue of climate change, doing something about it. Scientific understanding is that climate change is real, and it does have to do with fossil fuel emissions. And the two factors there to make that better is maybe we can avoid in our lifestyle, and that's been more or less a failure over the last since 79, I would say, like the last 50 years almost. And then there's also the possibility of capturing the carbon, sequestering the carbon. There's a plant doing that in Iceland, and it's fantastically expensive right now, but that may be one way. Or they talk about also reflecting some of the sunlight away is another plan. There's all kinds of interesting, and it gets back to the process of thought process, the rational process. There's kind of inventions that we may be able to come up with to ameliorate climate change. I think this month is going to be a little bit of an interesting factor in all that. Maybe some breakthroughs could be announced. It could be just a discussion between the two political parties in America as we're heading into this election. That was one of the questions asked in the debate last night, which was on the campaign trail. Do you believe climate change is a hoax? Which I believe Trump may have said, one of the Republican nominee for president may have said that. The Democrats are very much in favor of doing something about it, as far as the traditional idea, very common among scientists these days, that it is caused by carbon in the atmosphere. If we can use alternative sources of energy rather than burning fossil fuels, use the fossil fuels just for plastic and keep it underground. That's one way to approach this. I don't know how effective that is, considering we still get a lot of our energy from fossil fuels. But anyway, these are the things that are in our minds as we try to navigate these times. And I do think because of Haumea, this is Makemake representing this kind of activism, try to make something happen, that we may see. Well, we will see this in terms of the campaigning on both sides. The Democrats especially saying we want to do something about, certain activist agendas, more equality, social activism, maybe protecting the earth in many ways, protecting the species, protecting the degradation of the coral reefs, the acidity of the ocean, the temperature of the ocean, the size of the storms as a result of the extra energy because of that small increase in the average ocean temperature. And of course, the temperature is going up every year, it seems, is another record high somewhere. So anyway, I'm kind of going on and on about this. I apologize. It's very near and dear to my heart. And what I am trying to say here is that we may see some thing this month that lets us see a little bit more about what Makemake may in particular be all about, because it is very strong in this configuration that begins the 30-day lunation cycle for October. So that is one thing. And then there's also to be mentioned a grand trine in water between Venus at 11, almost 12 degrees of Scorpio, Saturn at 14 degrees of Pisces, and Mars. So Venus and Mars, that gets us into relationships. It gets us into the signs of Libra, Taurus, Eris, and also perhaps Scorpio with Mars. And also the Saturn, which is more of a damper on going forward very fast, very quickly. We have instead a slow motion forward with this close trine between, and an emphasized trine with Venus there, between Mars and Saturn. So it's almost like a Mercury retrograde situation where you have to do things 3 times to get it to happen. It takes a while to get things to go, and there's also lessons. Perhaps because of running into obstacles, we learn lessons about how we really need to go, and we do need to kind of have the slow progress and just resign ourselves that things won't go so quickly. So that is most of what I wanted to say. I mean, we do have also Neptune at 28, so sextile, so that's a pretty strong factor with the Pluto. And also we have the Pluto in square to Haumea, which is very important. This has been going on for quite a while. This has been active since February of 2023. And I've been talking about that. It does seem to have to do with telling the truth, because Haumea is involved with that, and Pluto, to see that there are consequences for having a moral compass or for not having a basic internal moral compass. There's consequences for lying, and we've seen those come out over and over again. Most recently, on July 21st, this was very much featured in the full moon of July 21st, which is when there was kind of a big movement within the campaign that kind of shook things up for Trump. People have been talking about how that was, because of his lies about the election results in 2020, which was pretty much understood completely now as perfectly fair election. Everybody said it was a free and fair election. There was no evidence of fraud, except the insistence on the part of Trump that there was, that he won, and then he tried to make it happen. So those are all the factors that are in the background of this election season, of the last 30 days of the election here. And quite interestingly, I think, we have the featured square between, it's not so much featured in this configuration, but it will be by the end of the month. So this is very interesting to me to see this square between Haumea and Pluto. I've been saying, when I see it coming, I've been saying, oh, look out, something's going to shift on the 21st of July, which is when it turned out that was when Biden handed the reins over to his vice president to run for office. And she was saying, well, I know this person's type. I know fraud when I see it. I know liars when I see them. And so that's been very interesting dynamic to observe. Let's look at some other of these lunations. I think it's important. So we do have, coming up on the 10th, the first quarter moon. So here we have the sun 7 degrees further on, as part of the 30-day cycle. And we have the moon at 17 of Capricorn to match, so that's the square. And guess what? We kind of have a grand cross going on here, because Mars at 19 is opposite the moon, a T-square to the sun from Moon-Mars opposition, and it all ties into Chiron at 21. So, and this is very interesting also because it turns out the 10th is one day after the station of Jupiter to retrograde motion. If you look in the previous chart, it's not retrograde. So it retrogrades right here at 21 degrees, which is the degree of Chiron. So, you have this very strong sextile, very strong because of the fact that Jupiter standing still is a powerful Jupiter. It's standing still in the sky, meaning it's much more heavyweight, you could say. And so this is a very strong Chiron in a T-square with Sun, Moon, and Mars. I'm sorry, not a T-square, but a grand cross in Earth signs. I'm sorry, in cardinal signs, with opposite the Sun, especially opposite the Sun Mercury. We could look at the midpoint of Sun and Mercury here. We have actually not 17 but almost 18 degrees, so 7 different from 25. And we have 3.5 we could add to the 18. 21.5 is exactly where Chiron is. And we can see that in the time passages software if we want, by taking a look at the midpoint report. And you can very easily see all the midpoints. So we can look for Sun Mercury, and here it is 21.5, like I was saying, of Libra. So, being opposite 21.5 of Chiron in Eris. So this is a very strong Chiron. What does that mean? Means, and of course, Chiron is also, we have another midpoint here that's important, which is the midpoint between Chiron and Eris. They're pretty close together. It's less than 4 degrees. So, you want to take that midpoint, which is around 23. And that's significant because various things are at 23 various times. But right now, not so much. But it is strong Chiron. So I believe that this first quarter moon, which is considered to be a crisis in action, things not blending well because the Sun and Moon in square, and then of course Mars accentuating that, Chiron being involved in that. So I think this is kind of a tough time. I mean, we might want to associate it with Mars and say, watch your words. You may hurt somebody unintentionally with your words. You want to be careful when you have strong Mars of blurting things out, of doing things impulsively. We do have to slow down. Remember, Mars is still in this trine to also Saturn, as it was in the beginning of the cycle, which is still counts. So we do have to kind of watch what we do, and there is that limitation on what we do in terms of the fact that we may be causing damage we don't want to, and then we may have to go back and repair. They say count to 10, if you can, before you blurt something out, or worse, do something physical that might be damaging and that you might regret later on. So there is that Chiron factor in this first quarter moon, and there is also the strong position of Jupiter, the fact that it's going the other way, standing still in the sky right now, meaning that our thought process is slowed to some extent, being in Gemini. And then finally, we also have in this configuration, because Mercury is at 25 Libra, which is exactly opposite the 25 Aries degree of Eris. So there is a very strong connection to what is our deepest purpose? What are we doing this for? Where can we take a step back and see what's really going on for us in terms of what our goals are? What are our final goals? What are we here for? What is the meaning of our life? What do we really think we're doing? What can we do to take a stand for what we deeply believe in the face of everything that includes early conditioning, which affects us and maybe we need to get past? The consensus doesn't always come up with the answer that really is our own true answer, and we have to kind of fight off those other influences to find our own way, our own purpose. Let's look at the full moon coming up on the 17th. And interestingly, that full moon at 24 degrees and 55 minutes of Libra now features a partile conjunction. Oh, this isn't the right timing, I don't think. Sorry, I have to make an adjustment here. I didn't do this right. It's at 4:26 a.m. So that means I have to adjust it by editing the chart. 4:26, 26 a.m. Sorry about that. Didn't prepare that correctly. So yeah, I'm sorry. So actually the real degree is 24 Libra 35 minutes, and that is opposite the moon at 24:35, and it is partile conjunct to Eris. So more so than I said as it was leading into it, that was true to some extent with Mercury being opposite Eris in the quarter moon, which was a pretty powerful quarter moon. Then we have the full moon, which is the culmination of the beginning. We get to some profound understanding based on where we were at when we started, based on what we were thinking in the moment of the new moon eclipse, where we were headed, we find out some modifications to that. We find out the flowering in some ways of that, and it does involve our sole purpose, our deepest connection with what we really believe, namely Eris. So that is interesting to see. Again, here we have a partile. We have Makemake partile conjunct the sun in the eclipse at the beginning, the new moon at the beginning, and then at the full moon we have the moon and the sun opposite, so connected, partile to the same degree to Eris, sole purpose, or what are we really here for, as I was talking about a minute ago. What is our true belief that we really can't go beyond? What is it that we just cannot not do? What do we really have to enunciate, articulate, act upon, with Makemake being strong, act upon that in our life? And that may be coming up in this very intense cycle of October that we're dealing with here. So that is very important to mention. It is also, with the sun and moon, a T-squared to Mars at 22, almost 23 degrees, also of Cancer. So we have that T-square, which is very powerful. So it's all about what we do, how we do it, how we make it count for what we really are about. What comes into it as well is the position of Pluto, very powerful in the chart, with both, you have a close trine with Uranus, you have a sextile with Neptune to Pluto, and you have, again, to mention it, you have Haumea in square. So this is a very strong Pluto. Look at this. Also Venus chimes in with a sextile. So there's a Venus trine to Neptune, which is very idealistic. Relationship, idealism, or fantasy could come into this, with Pluto involved right at the midpoint. So we do have a lot of transformational energy here, and that strong Eris position being so tied up with the actual sun and moon and the T-squared of Mars. So very powerful time, over and over again, as we see these lunations. Very powerful time. What do we got coming up at the last quarter, which is not till the 24th? So the 24th we have, by now, the sun has entered Scorpio. At 1 degree Scorpio, 24 minutes, actually partile conjunct Haumea, the other one of these two nature planets. So all three of these planets that are 21st century planets beyond Pluto, that are named officially as planets by the IAU, the astronomers, all three are in partile connection to the sun, and mostly the sun, the sun and then the moon in square, you see. So all three coming up in partile connection is just rather remarkable, and I wanted to make sure to mention that. And what I say about this is we do see that Haumea squared with Pluto usually has something to do with lies being exposed, with the comeuppance for lying. There was, for example, the settlement that happened when there was a defamation lawsuit by Dominion voting machines against Fox News because they knowingly lied about the election results. They had their own understanding, as expressed in their internal emails, but yet they promoted the lie that they thought their followers, their audience, their viewers really wanted to see the opposition to the idea of business as usual and the Democratic victory. They didn't want to have that, so they kind of tried to erase it. Trump was the start of that, but there was a lot of enablers, including Fox News was pushing, I think it was a lawyer whose name escapes me at the moment, but she was really pushing the idea that Caracas, Venezuela, Cesar Chavez had programmed the Dominion voting machines to screw up the vote and throw the vote to the Democrats, not where it was supposed to be. And that's what she was pushing as part of this whole thing, which is sometimes called the big lie, that Trump was pushing and the Fox News was pushing. And guess what? The judge had determined that there was no question, but they knew what they were doing when they promoted those things. They knew that it wasn't what they felt internally, as their memos to each other showed. And so that was open and shut, that it was actual defamation. It hurt the reputation of the company of Dominion voting machines, and they won a $787 million settlement. And they won it on the 18th of April. The 19th of April was an eclipse that really activated. It was at almost 0 degrees of Taurus opposite of Haumea, so it really activated this Haumea Pluto. And it was a defeat for the lie. So I associate this with the defeat of the lie. We see it very much involved in this quarter moon toward the end of the month, a week away from the November election, a little bit more than a week. And I do believe that things are going to keep shaping up, that, we don't want that anti-democratic notion of I don't care how the vote comes out, I just want to win. I just want to say I won. And we're going to see that again, as you know. And by the way, what's coming up with Mars is that Mars, by the time of election day, is going to be at 0 degrees of Leo. So therefore, opposite, and by that time, we won't see the entrance of Pluto into Aquarius until later in the month of November. But by election day, Mars will be at 0, squaring this position of Haumea at 1 degree of Scorpio. And it is all this huge T-square, and I think it shows that there may be a repudiation of the lie, is what I say. You can make your own conclusions about what's going to happen, but that's what I say. And it's very interesting to me to see that Mars is also going into its retrograde cycle. It is right now in the shadow. It's going to be at 0 degrees of Leo. Then by December, it gets to 6 degrees of Leo, and that's where it retrogrades back to 0. And it crosses back to the 1 degree mark of Leo, which is where the moon is right here, on the 3rd of January. And you know where I'm going with this. It's heading into this famous date coming up, January 6th, 2025, which is the certification of the election results, which will finally determine the victor, which either will determine the victor on that day, or if they decide that the certification is botched and doesn't go through for one reason or another, for complaints about election results that were not accurate, it might get thrown to the Congress, and it goes state by state in the Congress, where each state has a vote. Not by how many representatives the state has, but just one vote for each state. So that could be a very interesting scenario we see coming up on January 6th as well. That's certainly something the Republicans are hoping for. If they do lose, they're hoping that they can reverse that. And so we see that on January 3rd, Mars is at 1 degree of Leo, and January 6th, it will be at 0. Again, opposed to the 29 Capricorn position of Pluto, square to this position of Haumea, which is also, by the way, part of this last quarter. So we might see something come up in this last week of October, which reflects these kind of issues about lying versus truth. And lying versus truth is not confined to the election. I think it's a really huge issue for our times. Who's right about the invasion of Ukraine? Was Putin right because he was being threatened by nukes and by expansion of NATO? So he did the right thing for himself, for his country. He says it was a police action that was necessary. Or you have the other narrative that he invaded a sovereign country to try to annex their territory. And those are big questions for our times, for the whole world. Also, what we hear about the necessity for Israel to defend itself is one great truth, obviously true. But there's the other great truth that they go overboard with what they do sometimes. And I'm not trying to vote on this one way or the other, but we have all these questions that come up about what is the truth of the matter. It's not confined to our election. It's a matter for our times, and it's a very important matter. And I believe that this square, Haumea with Pluto, has a lot to say about that, and will keep coming up, including on the time frame between November 5th and January 6th, which is a divisive time frame that's in the future. So that's what I have for you today. I think it's very interesting, these couple of months, 3 months, 4 months that's coming up now. And best of luck with all that, as I say. To sum up, we're in tough times. What do you do when times are tough? You do your best. You come up with your most authentic self. You take your stand, which is what Eris tells us. And Eris telling us that is very important right now, because that is the way out of being a victim. The way out is to know what you stand for and to articulate that, to stand for that. So again, best of luck with all that. See you soon. Take care.